We're walking along the Rue Faubourg Saint-Honoré. We're going into the Louvre Museum, enjoying the treasures and the visual splendors of this incredible city. The Louvre Museum is the most famous art museum in the world, and we'll be looking at that as we jump around the city. Here we are in the center of town, the Opera Square, the Place Vendôme, the Tuileries Gardens, city of fashion and food. The outside of the opera is one of the greatest monuments in the city. The gates to the Tuileries Gardens. We'll be exploring the gardens of the Palais Royal. A quick look inside the Opera House, the Grand Lobby. Jumping around town, the fountains, the cafes, the Grand Boulevards, the Café de la Paix. And now we're going to enjoy an extended visit into the Palais Royal. There's two main entrances. From the north or rear end, we're coming in through the Rue de Beaujolais. And then there's the front entrance through the palace and the grand arcades just off of Place André Malraux. And right away, you're greeted by interesting things going on. There's this interesting courtyard, and let me tell you all about it. At the Palais Royal, they have a very modern sculpture garden in the front with all these striped pillars. Looks like I'm part of the garden itself. Just happen to be wearing my shirt, but the gardens are beautiful. There's fountains, there's benches, greenery and flowers. Let's take a walk in the gardens. This is an oasis of peace and tranquility, and it's right smack in the middle of the city center. Just outside are the very busy streets of Paris. The Louvre Museum is across the street, and on the other side is the Bibliothèque Nationale. But here you can relax, have a meal in the gardens, stroll along through these very impressive arcades, enjoy some window shopping. There's a series of art galleries and antique stores and stamp shops. And the lines of trees echo the lines of the arcaded columns in the midst of the gardens. It's a place to go to drop your cares and sit back, read the newspaper, study your guidebook, rest your feet if you've been walking all day. Just enjoy the flowers and have a drink. You could just have a coffee at one of these terrace cafes. There's several fountains in the gardens. It's a place for strolling, for exercise, for meditation. The spirit of the ancient art of Tai Chi symbolizes the tranquility and restfulness of the gardens. You might enjoy some more vigorous exercise. Running is even permitted here inside the gardens, but more likely you'll be strolling along or just sitting and watching. The gardens are never crowded, so there's always space on a park bench. It's a place where the locals like to hang out. You don't see very many tourists in the Palais Royal, and when a local sees a tourist taking pictures, they're kind of curious too. You'll find a variety of types of restaurants in the gardens. There's 3 or 4 different outdoor terrace cafes and restaurants. This place has gone to the dogs. They have a barking maitre d'. The restaurant's not quite open yet. The staff is just having their own lunch first. They open at midday, typical of a lot of Parisian restaurants. There is one very outstanding restaurant in the Palais Royal, and that's Le Grand Vefour. This is one of the top restaurants in the city, a 3-starred Michelin restaurant. You want to bring a wheelbarrow full of money if you're going to have dinner at Le Grand Vefour. It might cost you $120 per person for dinner with wine, and it would be worth it. You would thoroughly enjoy the experience. Or the other pleasures of the garden are free. There's no admission charge to the Palais Royal, and it's open all day long into the early evening. And even though it's free, it's never crowded in here because most tourists don't even know it exists. They only see it from the outside, so they miss out on these internal pleasures. There's quite a contrast between the old and the new in Paris. And then we ran into a birdman. This fellow comes on a regular basis and feeds the birds. They like it. These splendid gardens have a fascinating history. They got their start back in 1624. You see this building reflected in the chromium spheres. This is part of the original palace built by Cardinal Richelieu in the early 17th century. He expanded the mansion into the Cardinal's Palace and had his favorite architect Mercier come and construct this great edifice for him. Richelieu was the great power behind the throne in those days. He was the first minister of France, and until 1642, when he died, he essentially ruled the country. Nowadays, you don't have to be a royal to enjoy the Palais Royal. It's open to us common folk. You can play your games. Boule is one of the favorite games of the Parisian working man, and you'll find a game going on at almost any time of the day here in the Palais Royal. And of course, you can bring your pets into the gardens. The Parisians bring their dogs everywhere, even to chase the birds. A little bit of harmless fun. They'll be here at the noon hour, basking in the sun in the summertime. Of course, in the wintertime, it's not quite as popular, but outdoors in the beautiful spring or summertime, it's a great gathering spot. Well, after Cardinal Richelieu died in 1642, Louis XIII, who was the reigning monarch, inherited the gardens, but unfortunately, Louis didn't last very long, and it was then taken over by the young Louis XIV. However, the arcades that you see surrounding the gardens were built about 100 years later, in the late 18th century. And they were constructed by a nobleman who wanted to make some money. So he rented out the shops and he rented out the apartments upstairs. Here you see the front of the Palais Royal. And even today there's government offices inside, as well as some private apartments and the shops that we've seen. Behind, on Rue de Beaujolais, is a very interesting neighborhood. There's the Bibliothèque Nationale, which is the National Library of France. And we're in the neighborhood of the Bourse, which is the stock exchange, and there's some financial offices nearby. And Place de Victories, you see the statue of Louis XIV surrounded by a noble and circular square. The architecture was created to go with the statue, which is the reverse of what you might think. You see this beautiful statue in the middle of the place. Well, the statue came first, and the owner wanted to create a suitable context to hold this equestrian statue of Louis XIV. Nearby, you'll find several shopping arcades, including the Galerie Vivienne that was built in the early 19th century. And adjacent to it is the Galerie Colbert, where we enjoyed a wonderful meal. Le Grand Colbert is a super restaurant, open every evening. I advise you to call and make your reservations first, especially if you're going at 8 p.m. or more fashionably 9 p.m. And you will enjoy a very traditional French meal, Le Grand Colbert, in the Galeries Colbert. There are several other panorama passageways in the neighborhood in the second arrondissement, and it lends a certain aura and charm to the neighborhood. Outside again, in front of the Palais Royal, there's a sidewalk cafe that you might enjoy for more casual dining, or just an ice cream and coffee perhaps. As we make our way across town, we're going to be popping up in another part of the city now, as we go through these leafy little plazas, characteristic streets, and tree-lined banks of the River Seine. The boats are mostly working barges, although there are some houseboats along the river.